This is the real case of James Youngblom, 2014, Mount Shasta, California. He was a university professor and an experienced climber who vanished during a solo expedition on Mount Shasta. For 6 years, his whereabouts remained a mystery, until climbers stumbled upon his remains in 2020, hidden deep in an inaccessible glacier. The following images are generated with AI to illustrate the story. It was a cold spring morning in May 2014 when James Youngblom, a well-respected university professor and seasoned mountaineer, set out on what was supposed to be another challenging, yet manageable, solo climb up the legendary Mount Shasta in Northern California. James was not just a teacher of biology. He was a man who thrived in the wilderness, a figure admired by his colleagues and students alike for his relentless curiosity about life, nature, and the edges of human endurance. Friends later recalled how his eyes would light up when he spoke about the mountains. The silence of high altitudes was his sanctuary. That day, as he tightened his boots, adjusted his pack, and looked at the colossal peak that towered above the horizon, James seemed completely at ease. To him, this was not just another ascent. It was communion, a ritual with the mountain he knew so well. But what no one knew was that this climb would be his last, a journey that would end in mystery, silence, and an agonizing 6-year search for answers. From the outside, James appeared prepared, almost ritualistic in the way he approached every climb. His friends later recounted that he was meticulous, never reckless, and deeply aware of the dangers that Mount Shasta posed. Rising over 14,000 feet into the sky, Shasta is not just a mountain. It is a labyrinth of glaciers, steep ridges, and sudden weather changes. Locals know it as a place of beauty, but also as a place where lives vanish in an instant. Still, for James, climbing solo was more than an act of sport. It was a test of discipline, a measure of his own resilience against nature's unpredictability. That morning, he carried only what was necessary: ropes, crampons, layers of clothing, a small amount of food. He left behind his car at the trailhead, a detail that later became one of the few concrete markers in a case that would puzzle rescuers for years. When the sun began to dip behind the horizon that evening, James's absence was barely noticed. It wasn't unusual for climbers to take long routes, to stay longer than expected. But as the hours turned into a night, and the night stretched into another day, unease began to ripple through his circle of colleagues and family. Phone calls went unanswered. His return to campus never happened. Soon, a missing persons alert was issued, and search teams were mobilized. Helicopters hovered over ridges. Volunteers traced trails with dogs. Rangers scoured the mountain's icy corridors. Yet not a single clue surfaced. No footprints, no discarded gear, no signal of distress. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed James whole. Days turned into weeks. Hope battled against the unforgiving reality of Mount Shasta's terrain. His students kept his office door untouched, as though he might walk back in at any moment, with frost still on his jacket and a story to tell. But as summer arrived, the search was scaled back. Official reports labeled him as missing, presumed dead. The mountain had claimed him, and the question of where lingered like a haunting echo. His family was left with no closure, only the hollow weight of uncertainty. Mount Shasta, majestic yet merciless, had turned into a vault that concealed his fate. And for 6 long years, the silence of that vault remained unbroken. As the months turned into years, James Youngblom's disappearance grew into a story whispered with both sadness and fascination in the local community. Mount Shasta has always been wrapped in mystique, steeped in legends from Native American lore and more modern tales of vanished hikers, climbers, and even planes swallowed by its rugged slopes. James's case became one of the most perplexing because he was not an amateur. He was experienced, cautious, and deeply knowledgeable about the outdoors. If anyone could survive out there, it was James, one of his colleagues told a reporter at the time. And yet, despite extensive search operations, there were no signs, no trail of broken branches, no shredded fabric, no equipment left behind. It was as though he had walked into the mountain and dissolved into thin air. The Shasta County Sheriff's Department documented every step of the investigation. Search parties combed the Avalanche Gulch, circled the Whitney Glacier, and ventured into steep crevasses where even the most agile climbers hesitated. Helicopters equipped with thermal cameras scanned the slopes, searching for any sign of human presence. Still, nothing emerged. Each lead led to a dead end. Each day passed with no breakthrough, until the case turned cold. For the Youngblum family, the silence was unbearable. They were left to oscillate between hope and despair, their grief complicated by the torment of not knowing. Was James alive somewhere, lost and unable to return? Or had the mountain claimed him swiftly, without leaving a trace? Meanwhile, among the climbing community, James's disappearance became a cautionary tale. Guides and climbers spoke about him with reverence and fear, reminding each other that Mount Shasta, while breathtaking, demanded humility. Solo climbs in particular carried risks that even experts could not fully anticipate. "The mountain doesn't care how much experience you have," one rescuer remarked bluntly, reflecting the unforgiving reality that no level of skill could entirely shield someone from nature's unpredictability. Still, the mystery of James's vanishing gnawed at everyone involved. It was rare, nearly unheard of, for an experienced mountaineer to disappear without a single trace. Back on campus, James's absence was like a shadow in the halls of the biology department. His office was left almost untouched, stacks of papers and books resting where he had last placed them. Students remembered his voice during lectures, his passion for explaining the delicate balance of ecosystems, and the way he encouraged curiosity above all else. To them, he wasn't just a professor who had vanished. He was a mentor who had shaped their academic journeys. Candlelight vigils were held in his memory, and as the years passed, a quiet acceptance grew, though never complete. There was always that lingering whisper, what if? What if he had survived somewhere on the mountain, waiting, hidden in its endless ridges? What if someday someone stumbled upon the truth? And then, in 2020, 6 years after James's disappearance, the mountain finally spoke. A group of climbers venturing into an area rarely touched by human footsteps stumbled across remains. The location was treacherous, concealed in a harsh section of terrain far from the usual climbing routes. Authorities were called immediately, and within days, forensic testing confirmed what many had long suspected but never fully accepted. The remains were those of James Youngblum. The discovery sent a shiver through the community. After 6 silent years, Mount Shasta had returned what it had taken. Yet, even in revelation, the mystery endured. For every answer found, new questions arose. How had he ended up in that remote location? What had gone wrong? And why had the mountain kept him hidden for so long? When the news of James Youngblum's remains being discovered broke in 2020, it reignited the emotions of everyone who had once searched, prayed, or simply wondered about his fate. For 6 years, silence had been their only companion, and now, suddenly, the story had shifted from endless speculation to the grim confirmation of death. Yet the discovery did not close the case. It only deepened the intrigue. The spot where James was found was one of Mount Shasta's most unforgiving corners, a place rarely explored, riddled with jagged ridges, loose rock, and ice. Experienced climbers who later studied the area speculated that he might have strayed from his original route, perhaps forced by a sudden storm or disoriented by the thin, biting air. To end up where he did meant one thing: whatever happened to James was swift, and it allowed no return. Authorities quickly secured the site. Search and rescue teams retraced the steps as best they could, marking the exact coordinates and collecting the remains with painstaking care. Forensic experts examined what little could be gathered after years of exposure to the harsh alpine conditions. Time, weather, and wildlife had erased many details. No definitive cause of death could be established, leaving only possibilities: a fall, hypothermia, a sudden medical emergency. The mountain had preserved his body in silence but denied the answers to how his final hours unfolded. News outlets picked up the story, and once again, James's name circulated across headlines. The once active search effort of 2014 was rehashed in detail as journalists reminded readers of the helicopters, the search dogs, the endless trails combed for signs of him. For his colleagues and family, the discovery reopened wounds. But it also offered a strange, bittersweet solace. His wife, speaking briefly to local reporters, said that while the pain was still sharp, there was comfort in knowing he was no longer lost. "He's home now," she said, her words carrying the weight of 6 years of uncertainty and grief. Among climbers, however, the story became something else entirely. A haunting reminder of the razor-thin line between triumph and tragedy in the mountains. Discussions filled climbing forums, with some speculating about whether James had underestimated a section of terrain or if an unexpected avalanche had pushed him off course. Others argued that he might have faced a sudden injury. Something as small as a twisted ankle could have been fatal in such an isolated place. But all agreed on one point: James's disappearance and eventual discovery emphasized the sheer unpredictability of Mount Shasta. The mystery also sparked the imagination of those who saw Mount Shasta as more than a mountain. Over decades, Shasta had become a magnet for myths, tales of hidden civilizations, UFO sightings, and unexplained vanishings. Some locals, steeped in legend, whispered that James's case was part of a larger pattern, that the mountain had a way of choosing who it revealed and who it concealed. Rational minds dismissed these claims, but the timing, the secrecy of the mountain's silence, and the eerie way James's remains had lain undiscovered for so long, fed the mythos further. It wasn't just a mountaineer's tragedy anymore, it was folklore in the making. Back at the university, the biology department finally had an answer they never wanted, but it shifted the energy on campus. Memorials were organized anew. Students and faculty gathered to share stories of his life and his love for exploration. His colleagues remembered him not as a victim of the mountain, but as a man who lived his life exactly as he taught others, curious, fearless, and unafraid to step beyond the comfort of safety. Yet even in remembrance, questions lingered in every corner of those who had known him. What had James seen in his final hours? Did he realize he wouldn't make it back? The answers, like so much else on Mount Shasta, remained locked in silence. In the aftermath of the discovery, investigators pieced together what little evidence they had, trying to reconstruct James Youngblum's final journey. Maps of Mount Shasta were studied, weather reports from 2014 revisited, and interviews with climbers who had been on the mountain that week re-examined. One detail stood out. The conditions during his climb had shifted dramatically within hours. Clear skies had quickly clouded over, and sudden gusts of wind swept across the slopes, carrying snow and sleet in sharp bursts. Climbers familiar with Shasta knew this pattern all too well. The mountain was infamous for rapid weather changes that could turn a routine ascent into a life-threatening ordeal. Perhaps James had been caught in one of those storms, visibility reduced to nothing, forcing him off his route and into the perilous section where he was eventually found. Another possibility was terrain itself. The area in which his remains were discovered was remote, steep, and rarely chosen by climbers. For James to end up there suggested either a conscious detour or a desperate attempt to descend. If he had fallen, even a relatively short distance, he might have sustained injuries that made it impossible to continue. And on a mountain like Shasta, immobility often means death. Hypothermia can set in quickly, and without shelter, even the most prepared climber has little chance of survival. Though speculation abounded, no theory could ever be confirmed with certainty. The mountain had guarded its secrets too well, leaving only fragments of a story. For his family, the speculation was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant James's disappearance was still being treated with seriousness, his life respected and analyzed as though each possibility mattered. On the other hand, it prolonged the uncertainty, reminding them of every unknown detail. His loved ones had spent 6 years in limbo, imagining countless endings to his story, and now, even with his body returned, they were still denied the peace of knowing exactly what had gone wrong. Closure had arrived, but it was incomplete. The broader community around Mount Shasta also absorbed the weight of his story. Local rangers spoke of how his disappearance had shaped their procedures, pushing them to refine search tactics and extend training for volunteers. His case was often cited in workshops, a sobering reminder that even skilled climbers could vanish in ways that defied explanation. Each time a new hiker went missing on Shasta in the years after, James's name resurfaced in conversations, a haunting reference point to the mountain's dangers. His story had become part of the very fabric of Shasta's identity, woven into the ongoing list of lives lost to its slopes. But beyond the practical lessons, there was something almost mythical in how people described his fate. For many, Mount Shasta was more than a geographical landmark. It was a force, ancient and enigmatic. Legends of hidden tunnels, spiritual gateways, and unexplained phenomena surrounded its name. Some who heard of James's 6-year absence framed it as though the mountain had held him in its grip until it was ready to let go. Rational explanations struggled to compete with the allure of mystery. His case, already heartbreaking, became part of the folklore that continues to swirl around Shasta like its perpetual clouds. For those who had known James personally, though, myth and mystery mattered less than the man himself. At memorials, former students spoke of how his passion had sparked their careers, how his encouragement had given them confidence to pursue paths they once thought impossible. Colleagues described a man of intellect and humility, someone who treated the natural world with reverence and saw teaching as an extension of his love for discovery. To them, James was not simply another tragic statistic of Mount Shasta. He was a teacher, a friend, a husband, a life lived with curiosity and courage. His disappearance was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a testament to the unpredictable beauty and danger of the mountains he so loved. As word of James Youngblum's confirmed death spread, climbers, locals, and students all revisited the years of silence that had followed his disappearance. For 6 long years, his name had hovered in conversations like a ghost, often spoken in past tense but never fully released into memory. With his remains now identified, the silence gave way to stories, memories that poured out as if those who had known him needed to anchor his life to something tangible. At Shasta's base town, mountaineering shops recalled the quiet professor who would stop in for supplies, asking questions not out of ignorance, but out of deep curiosity. On campus, younger faculty described how James always went beyond the call of duty, mentoring not just students but colleagues, always willing to share advice and guidance. And former students, many of whom had built careers inspired by his teaching, now spoke of how their professors' lessons in biology had also been lessons in resilience, persistence, and wonder. But while memories filled the silence, the story itself refused to settle neatly into closure. The sight of his discovery continued to raise questions. Why had no previous search uncovered him, despite countless volunteers and professionals scouring the mountain in 2014? Was the terrain so treacherous that even the most methodical searches missed it? Or had his body been hidden, buried under snow and ice, until time and shifting landscapes revealed him years later? For rescuers, these questions cut deep because search and rescue was not just a duty. It was a responsibility to the families who waited below. To know that James had been there all along, within the mountain shadows, stirred both frustration and sorrow. Psychologists who study disappearances note that such cases leave a unique mark on loved ones. Unlike sudden loss, where death is undeniable, a disappearance suspends grief in an endless loop of what-ifs. Families must live in the tension of hope and despair, often torturing themselves with imagined scenarios. James's family endured exactly that torment. For 6 years, every time the phone rang or news of an unidentified climber reached the papers, their hearts leapt and fell in equal measure. Even when their rational minds knew the odds, the absence of proof meant hope never fully died. And when his remains were finally discovered, that same hope had to be extinguished abruptly, a cruel ending to years of limbo. Among climbers, the case became an enduring parable about the danger of overconfidence in solitude. James was not reckless, but the mountain made no distinction. Guides reminded their clients that even the best prepared mountaineers could face accidents beyond control, loose rock, sudden storms, hidden crevasses. James's name became synonymous with humility, a warning that preparation does not equate to invincibility. Still, many also defended his choice to climb solo, noting that for some, solitude in the mountains is not recklessness, but spiritual necessity. In forums and articles, climbers debated endlessly. Was his final climb an act of unnecessary risk, or was it the purest expression of his passion for mountaineering? Beyond the debates, however, there remained the undeniable aura of mystery. 6 years hidden, then found almost by accident, this was not just a tragedy, but a puzzle, one that refused to fully resolve. And for a mountain already drenched in myth and legend, James's fate only added fuel. To some, his story was proof of Mount Shasta's unforgiving power. To others, it was evidence of its eerie and unexplained nature. Whatever the interpretation, James Youngblum's disappearance had crossed the line between fact and folklore, forever entwining his name with one of California's most enigmatic peaks. By the time 2020 brought the truth to light, the legend of James Youngblum had already taken root in the cultural memory surrounding Mount Shasta. His story had become more than a missing persons case. It was a symbol, invoked whenever climbers debated risk, or locals spoke about the mysterious aura of the mountain. And when his remains were found, the narrative only grew stronger, because the discovery did not explain his fate, it only confirmed it. For the public, this duality between truth and mystery made his story unforgettable. He was the professor who vanished, the mountaineer swallowed by Shasta, the man whose silent vigil on the slopes lasted 6 years before being revealed. At candlelight vigils in 2020, hundreds gathered to honor him. Students who had long since graduated returned to campus, holding photographs and telling stories of his impact on their lives. Some recalled how he would pause mid-lecture to share an anecdote about fieldwork in the wild, his eyes glowing with excitement. Others remembered the patience with which he nurtured struggling students, never dismissing a question, always encouraging curiosity. His colleagues spoke about his generosity of spirit, his willingness to spend hours discussing research ideas or mentoring young faculty. The grief was profound, but so too was the pride. Pride in having known him, pride in carrying forward his lessons. At the same time, the mountain community grappled with its own emotions. Climbers retraced James's likely path, discussing the hazards, analyzing weather reports, and debating whether anything could have been done differently. Some admitted a quiet fear. If someone as skilled and prepared as James could vanish for 6 years, what did that mean for them? The mountains had always been dangerous, but this story stripped away the illusion of control. "We don't conquer mountains," one veteran climber remarked in an interview. "We borrow time on them, and sometimes they take it back." James's story became a teaching tool, a sobering reminder of humility. Yet, for others, the mystique overshadowed the practical lessons. Mount Shasta has long been associated with folklore, tales of hidden civilizations like Lemurians, portals to other realms, and unexplained disappearances. To those inclined toward the mystical, James's 6-year absence seemed to fit perfectly within that mythos. His sudden disappearance, the complete lack of trace, and his eventual discovery in such an inaccessible spot all fueled speculation. Was it simply nature or something stranger? While rational voices dismissed such ideas, the allure of the unexplained could not be silenced. His case became another thread in the tapestry of Shasta's myths, whispered alongside stories of lost pilots, vanished hikers, and strange lights in the night sky. For his family, however, the story was far simpler and far more painful. They had endured 6 years of uncertainty, of oscillating between faint hope and crushing despair. Now they faced the finality of death. But within that finality, they also found a small measure of peace. They could lay James to rest, mourn with certainty rather than speculation. His wife, in a quiet statement, expressed gratitude to those who had searched, those who had remembered, and those who had prayed. Her words carried a depth of resilience, a recognition that James's story was now part of something larger than themselves. He would never be forgotten, not only because of how he died, but because of how he lived with passion, curiosity, and courage. In the years since, every retelling of his disappearance and a discovery has carried a weight, a blend of grief, respect, and awe. To some, he is a symbol of the mountain's power. To others, he is a mentor who left an indelible mark on their lives. And to the wider world, his story remains one of the most haunting reminders that nature, for all its beauty, is also vast, unpredictable, and ultimately untamable. The years following James Youngblum's discovery did not diminish the weight of his story. In fact, the retelling grew, spreading beyond Northern California into documentaries, online forums, and podcasts dedicated to mysterious disappearances. Each retelling emphasized the chilling detail that James had not been found for 6 long years, despite massive search efforts. For many listeners, that detail alone transformed his case from a tragic accident into something almost supernatural. And Mount Shasta, already legendary for its aura of mystery, became an even stronger focal point for fascination. Whenever stories of strange vanishings circulated, James's name invariably surfaced. A respected professor, an experienced climber, who walked into the mountain and never came back. But the fascination with his disappearance was not only about the mystery, it was about the man himself. Those who had known him in life refused to let his identity dissolve into folklore. At the university, his legacy was preserved through scholarships and lectures held in his honor. Former students, now professionals in biology, medicine, and conservation, often credited James as a pivotal influence. They spoke of his encouragement, how he instilled not just knowledge, but a hunger for discovery. In honoring his memory, they emphasized not how he died, but how he lived. His disappearance might have become a symbol of the mountain's dangers, but his life was a symbol of passion, resilience, and devotion to knowledge. Still, the questions would not vanish. Each new climber who attempted Shasta carried with them the echo of James's story. Guides often mentioned him to clients, cautioning them about overconfidence and the thin veil between adventure and tragedy. Climbers would pause at certain ridges, gazing toward the area where he was eventually found, and wonder, what exactly happened up there? The silence of the mountain offered no answers, and in that silence, speculation continued to grow. Some theories were straightforward. He may have been caught in a sudden storm, fallen, or succumbed to hypothermia. Others leaned toward the more enigmatic. Online communities devoted to mysteries debated his case endlessly, weaving it into larger narratives about Shasta's unexplained disappearances. To believers in the mountain's legends, James's 6 years in hiding were no coincidence. They suggested that his vanishing was part of something larger, that the mountain had held him until the time was right to reveal him. Rational or not, such theories added to the mythic weight of his story, ensuring it would be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a riddle. For his family, those speculations were often painful to hear. They had lived the reality of his absence, the long nights waiting for news, the agony of unanswered questions. To them, James was not a symbol or a myth. He was a husband, a brother, a friend. And yet they understood that his story had grown beyond their private grief. His disappearance had touched a nerve in the wider world because it spoke to something universal: the fear of vanishing, the thin thread by which all human life is tied to nature's indifference. James's story became a mirror, reflecting both the fragility of human existence and the enduring allure of the unknown. For climbers, it was a reminder of risk. For students, it was a lesson in resilience. For storytellers, it was fuel for myth. And for his family, it was a reminder that love can endure even through mystery and loss. 6 years of silence had ended, but the echoes of his final climb would reverberate for decades to come. James Youngblum's story closes not with answers, but with resonance, an echo that lingers long after the final chapter. The mountain that claimed him continues to tower silently over Northern California, a sentinel of both beauty and danger. For many, his fate stands as a reminder that nature is not merely a backdrop for human ambition. It is a force that humbles, reshapes, and sometimes erases us entirely. And yet, woven into the tragedy of his disappearance and delayed discovery is a profound testament to the enduring human spirit, the drive to explore, to push beyond boundaries, even when the risks are great. James embodied that drive, not recklessly, but with reverence. He loved the wilderness, he respected it, and in the end it became the setting of his final chapter. For the climbing community, his legacy persists each time a new climber sets foot on Mount Shasta. His name is whispered in cautionary tones, a story retold at base camps and trailheads. He is invoked not to instill fear, but to inspire humility. To remember James is to remember that even the most experienced among us are vulnerable, and that preparation, skill, and respect must walk hand in hand with awareness of nature's unpredictability. His disappearance was not just a personal loss. It was a communal lesson, one that continues to shape how climbers view the mountain. For his students and colleagues, his story remains deeply personal. They carry forward the spark of curiosity he lit in them, the resilience he modeled, the passion for discovery that colored every lecture he gave. To them, James is not only the man who vanished, but the mentor who taught them how to see the world differently, who showed them that exploration, whether in science or in nature, was worth the risk, the effort, the uncertainty. In classrooms and laboratories, his influence continues, a legacy untouchable by tragedy. And for the world beyond Shasta, his name has joined a longer list of those whose disappearances defy simple explanation. His 6 years of silence, followed by a discovery that raised more questions than it answered, place him among the enduring mysteries of the wilderness. Stories like his remind us of the fragility of certainty, of how quickly the known can dissolve into the unknown. They speak to a primal fear that we too could vanish without explanation, but also to a universal fascination with mystery. In the end, James's story is both a tragedy of loss and a riddle that fuels imagination. As the sun sets over Mount Shasta, casting long shadows across its ridges and glaciers. One can almost imagine James there, quiet, contemplative, gazing at the horizon as he so often did in life. His remains may have been returned, his story may have been written, but the mountain still holds the silence of his final hours. That silence is what endures, what haunts, what keeps his name alive. James Youngblum vanished into the mountain, and though he has been found, part of him will always remain there, woven into its myths, its dangers, its timeless call to those who cannot resist climbing higher.